The heavy autumn rains hadn't stopped for days. A 2-year-old child slips into the backyard while the adults chat on the porch. Disoriented, they walk through the mud to a lot in the back, hidden by tall vegetation. Under a torn tarp, they stumble upon a nearly buried cage. Inside, a German shepherd covered in dirt lifts its head with difficulty. The child touches the cold metal and sits in silence in front of the dog. Minutes later, love stories with animals? Then subscribe now and don't miss a single one. Thanks for watching. Now, back to our story. The autumn rains arrived early in Mapleton, Vermont, unexpected and relentless. For days, the small town had been blanketed by a permanently clouded sky and the persistent scent of wet earth. The usually dry and firm fields had transformed into vast stretches of slippery mud, and the backyards of properties now resembled forgotten regions of a world in slow dissolution. Emma Wilson sat by the window of her parents' farmhouse, watching raindrops chase each other down the glass. At 32, she had returned to her childhood home for what was supposed to be a brief visit with her 2-year-old son, Ethan. Now, as the rain showed no signs of stopping, their weekend trip had extended into its 5th day. "Mom, are you sure you don't mind us staying longer?" Emma called out, her eyes still fixed on the glistening landscape beyond the window. Martha Stewart, Emma's mother, emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. At 65, she moved with the quiet determination that had carried her through decades of farm life. "Don't be silly. Having you and Ethan here is the most excitement this old house has seen in years." Emma smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. 6 years away from Mapleton had created a distance that couldn't be measured in miles alone. Her hasty departure after college, her marriage to David in Seattle, the birth of Ethan, and now the separation. Life had moved so quickly that she barely recognized herself in her childhood bedroom mirror. "Where's Dad?" Emma asked, changing the subject. "Out checking the barn. You know Robert, he worries about everything when it rains like this." Martha sat down beside her daughter. "And where's my little tornado?" "Napping finally. All this rain has made him restless." "Dee?" In the silence that followed, both women listened to the rhythmic drumming on the roof, each lost in thoughts they weren't ready to share. Several miles across town, in a modest ranch house at the edge of Mapleton, Jack Reynolds stared at the stack of unpaid bills on his kitchen table. At 41, life had taken turns he never anticipated. The veterinary clinic he'd built from scratch was barely staying afloat, and the divorce 3 years ago had left him with a house too big for one person and memories too painful to escape. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Jack pulled on his raincoat. The weather forecast promised another 3 days of rain, and he needed to check on the property's drainage system before things got worse. As he stepped into his backyard, mud immediately clung to his boots, making each step a deliberate effort. Jack's property backed up against the old Miller farm, which had been abandoned for nearly 2 years now. Behind the overgrown vegetation and accumulated debris of years, there stood an almost invisible structure, an old iron cage, half buried in mud, covered by a torn and twisted tarp. Few knew of its existence, and even fewer remembered what had been left there. Inside the cage, a German shepherd with thick fur, now dirty and matted, breathed with difficulty. The space was so cramped that its movements were limited. Mud had invaded part of the base of the cage, making the floor uneven and unstable, and the tarp over the structure prevented air circulation. Without clean water, without food for days, and exposed to the damp cold, the animal resisted as best it could. Its eyes, though tired, still followed any sound or movement that approached, keeping a spark of alertness and hope alive. The dog had once been called Max, a name given by Old Man Miller before his sudden heart attack had left the farm vacant and neglected. The neighbors had divided up the livestock, but somehow Max had been forgotten, pushed to the far edge of the property where the cage had originally been used for temporary housing during a kennel renovation. As weeks turned to months and visitors to the farm dwindled, Max's existence faded from local memory. Only the occasional rabbit or field mouse, drawn to the remnants of food long consumed, provided any company. Back at the Wilson farmhouse, Robert Wilson stomped his boots at the back door, shaking off mud and rain. At 68, his frame remained sturdy from decades of farm work, though his movements had slowed in recent years. "Everything okay out there?" Martha asked, handing him a towel. "Water's coming in under the north corner of the barn. Nothing serious yet, but we'll need to keep an eye on it." He nodded toward Emma. "How's our girl doing?" "I'm right here, Dad," Emma said with a forced smile. "And I'm fine." Robert studied his daughter with knowing eyes. "Sure you are. And that's why you've been staring out that window like you're watching for something that ain't coming." "Robert," Martha cautioned. "It's okay, Mom." Emma stood up, stretching her legs. "Dad's not wrong. I just have a lot on my mind. The divorce papers were delivered before we left Seattle. David wants to expedite everything." Robert's face darkened. That boy never did know what he had. "Let's not do this now," Emma pleaded. "Ethan might hear." As if summoned, a small voice called from upstairs. "Mommy?" "Speaking of my favorite grandson," Robert's tone immediately lightened. "Is he up from his nap already?" Emma nodded, grateful for the interruption. "I'll go get him." Upstairs, Ethan sat in the middle of the guest bed, his blonde curls tousled from sleep, blue eyes wide with the peculiar seriousness that children sometimes possess. At 2.5 years old, he spoke in simple sentences, but understood far more than he could express. "Hey, buddy," Emma said, sitting beside him. "Did you have a good nap?" Ethan nodded, then asked, "Outside?" Emma glanced toward the window where rain continued to fall steadily. "Not today, sweetheart. It's still raining." "Wanna see?" Ethan insisted, climbing off the bed and padding to the window. Standing on tiptoes, he pressed his small hands against the glass, his breath creating foggy circles. Water everywhere. That's right. The rain makes water everywhere. Emma knelt beside him, wrapping an arm around his small shoulders. "Sad rain," Ethan said unexpectedly, his eyes fixed on the glistening yard below. "You think the rain is sad?" Emma asked. Surprised by her son's perception, Ethan nodded solemnly. "Someone out there. Sad." Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Sometimes Ethan said things that seemed beyond his years, observations that felt almost prescient. David had dismissed these moments as coincidence or overactive imagination, but Emma had always sensed something deeper in her son's unusual awareness. "Who's sad, Ethan?" she asked gently. He pressed his forehead against the window, eyes scanning the landscape with unexpected focus, waiting, sad waiting. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the roof with renewed vigor. In the distance, from the direction of the abandoned Miller property, a faint sound carried on the wind, the weak, exhausted whimper of a dog, too proud to give up entirely, but too broken to hope for rescue. And somewhere between that sound and the warmth of the Wilson home, a connection was forming, invisible but undeniable, between a forgotten guardian and an intuitive child who somehow sensed his presence across the distance. The next morning brought no relief from the rain. If anything, it fell more insistently, as if determined to wash away the foundations of Mapleton itself. Martha busied herself in the kitchen, preparing a heartier than usual breakfast, while Robert pored over weather forecasts on his tablet. "They're saying we might get a break tomorrow afternoon," he announced, as Emma descended the stairs with Ethan in her arms. "That's something at least," Emma replied, settling Ethan into his booster seat at the table. "This little guy is getting cabin fever." "Outside today?" Ethan asked hopefully, reaching for the sippy cup Martha placed before him. "Not today, sweetheart," Emma answered, exchanging a look with her mother. "But maybe tomorrow." "Now," Ethan insisted, his lower lip protruding in the beginning of a stubborn pout, an expression Emma recognized all too well from her own childhood photos. "Ethan Wilson," Martha said gently but firmly, "sometimes we have to wait for what we want. Patience is a virtue." "What's virtue?" Ethan asked, momentarily distracted. "Something your father never had," Emma muttered under her breath. Immediately regretting the bitterness that colored her words, Robert cleared his throat. "It means being good, even when it's hard, champ. Like waiting for the rain to stop instead of getting all muddy outside." Ethan considered this while chewing a piece of pancake. "But mud is fun," he concluded with impeccable toddler logic. The adults laughed, tension momentarily broken. Breakfast proceeded with light-hearted conversation, deliberately avoiding topics that might lead to discomfort. By mid-morning, the rain had reduced to a steady drizzle, and restlessness permeated the house. "I might drive into town for groceries," Martha suggested. "We're running low on a few things." "I'll come with you," Robert offered. "The truck needs gas anyway." Emma glanced at Ethan, who was growing increasingly frustrated with the indoor toys that had entertained him yesterday. "We'll stay here. Maybe by the time you get back, it'll be clear enough for a quick walk around the yard." After her parents left, Emma tried everything to keep Ethan engaged. Books, building blocks, even allowing a rare session of tablet games. Nothing held his attention for long. His eyes kept drifting to the windows, tracking the movement of raindrops with unusual intensity. "What are you looking for out there, buddy?" Emma asked, joining him at the living room window. "The sad waiting," Ethan replied simply, pressing his palm against the glass. "You mentioned that yesterday," Emma said, brushing a curl from his forehead. "Can you tell me more about the sad waiting?" Ethan frowned in concentration. "It's cold and wet and hungry." He looked up at Emma with solemn eyes. "We should help." Emma felt that same inexplicable chill she'd experienced the day before. "Help who, Ethan? Is it a person you're thinking about?" Ethan shook his head decisively. "Not person, friend." He pointed toward the far end of the property, where the Wilson land bordered the abandoned Miller farm. "There." Emma peered through the rain-streaked glass, but could see nothing unusual, just the blurred outlines of trees and undergrowth at the property line. "I don't see anyone, sweetie." "He's hiding," Ethan insisted, "but I can hear him." Emma was about to explain that his imagination was playing tricks when the phone rang. It was her mother calling to say they'd run into neighbors at the grocery store and would be delayed. Something about flood warnings for the creek that ran behind the Miller property. "Be careful driving home," Emma cautioned. "We will. How's Ethan?" Emma glanced over at her son, who had abandoned the window and was now putting on his tiny rain boots with determined concentration. "He's keeping busy. I should go, Mom. He's up to something." By the time Emma ended the call, Ethan had not only managed his boots, but had also pulled his raincoat from the low hook by the door. His face was set with the particular determination that all parents recognize as trouble. "Whoa there, adventure man," Emma said, kneeling to his level. "Where do you think you're going?" "To help the sad waiting," Ethan replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. He reached for the doorknob, stretching to his full height. "Ethan, no. It's raining and muddy outside. Plus, Grandma and Grandpa would be very worried if they came home and found us gone." "But he needs us." Ethan's voice quavered with emotion too complex for his vocabulary. "He's been waiting so long, Mommy." Emma studied her son's face, torn between dismissing this as toddler fantasy and acknowledging the unusual conviction behind his words. In the 2 years since Ethan's birth, she'd come to recognize that there was something special about his awareness, a sensitivity to things others missed. David had called it nonsense, but Emma had always believed their son possessed an extraordinary empathy. "Tell you what," she compromised, "when the rain stops tomorrow, we'll go exploring together. We can look for whatever it is you're sensing." "No!" Ethan's voice rose with unexpected urgency. "Now! It has to be now!" Danes, the intensity of his reaction startled Emma. Ethan was typically an even-tempered child, rarely given to outbursts. Something about his insistence felt different from ordinary toddler demands. "Okay," she said slowly, making a decision that felt simultaneously reckless and right. "We'll go outside, but only for 5 minutes, and you have to hold my hand the entire time. Deal?" Ethan's face brightened. "Deal!" Emma quickly pulled on her own rain gear, then wrapped Ethan in an extra layer before opening the back door. The air was thick with moisture, the yard transformed into a landscape of puddles and mud. She lifted Ethan over the worst of it, placing him on a relatively solid patch of grass. "Which way?" she asked, half expecting him to lose interest now that they were actually outside. Without hesitation, Ethan pointed toward the property line, where an old footpath wound through overgrown bushes toward the Miller farm. "There." "Ethan, that's not our land. It belongs to—" Emma stopped, realizing the explanation meant nothing to a 2-year-old. "It's very muddy that way, and there are probably thorns in those bushes." But Ethan was already pulling her forward, his small hand gripping her fingers with surprising strength. "He's waiting," he repeated, his voice taking on an almost hypnotic certainty. They moved slowly through the yard, Emma carrying Ethan over the deepest puddles. The rain had subsided to a fine mist, but everything was drenched, water dripping from leaves and branches onto their heads. As they approached the property line, Emma felt increasingly uneasy. The Miller farm had been abandoned for nearly 2 years, and while she knew logically that there was nothing dangerous there, childhood stories of the haunted farmhouse resurfaced in her memory. "Ethan, I think we should turn back," she began. But her son had somehow slipped from her grasp and was moving with unexpected agility through a gap in the bushes that she hadn't noticed. "Ethan!" Emma called, pushing through the wet foliage after him. On the other side, a narrow trail led through tall grass toward a section of the Miller property she'd never explored, even as a teenager. "Ethan Wilson, you come back here right now." She caught glimpses of his yellow raincoat ahead, moving with purposeful direction rather than the random wandering typical of toddlers. Her heart pounded as she followed, calling his name with increasing desperation. The trail dipped slightly, and Emma lost sight of him for a terrifying moment. When she crested a small rise, she froze. 20 yards ahead, Ethan stood motionless before what appeared to be a heap of metal and canvas, half buried in mud and fallen branches. "Ethan!" she gasped, rushing forward. "Don't touch anything! There could be—" She stopped abruptly as she reached her son. From beneath a torn and filthy tarp, a pair of amber eyes watched them. The German Shepherd was barely recognizable through the matted fur and mud, but the intelligence in that gaze was unmistakable. It lay in a cramped metal cage, partially submerged in rainwater and mud, its body so still that for a horrifying moment Emma thought it might not be alive. "Oh my God," she whispered, taking in the scene. The cage was padlocked, the surrounding area strewn with evidence of long neglect. Empty food cans, a water bowl long dried out, a weathered collar hanging from a nearby post. Ethan knelt in the mud, oblivious to the mess, and placed his small hand against the cage. "Found you," he said softly. "No more sad waiting." The dog's tail moved, just the slightest twitch, but enough to confirm it lived. Its eyes never left Ethan's face, and there was something in that gaze that made Emma's breath catch. Recognition. Not of Ethan specifically, but of something in him. A quality beyond physical appearance. "How did you know?" Emma asked her son, kneeling beside him despite the mud seeping through her jeans. "How did you know he was here?" Ethan looked at her with eyes too wise for his years. "He was calling me." He turned back to the dog. "I heard you. I came." Just as the German Shepherd made a small sound, not quite a whimper, more like a sigh, and shifted slightly in the cramped space. Now that Emma looked more closely, she could see how emaciated the animal was. ribs visible even through the thick matted coat. How long had it been here? Weeks? Months? "We need to get help," Emma said, pulling out her phone. No signal. Of course, this part of the property was notorious for poor reception. "We can't leave him," Ethan said firmly, his hand still pressed against the cage. "We won't, sweetheart, but we need tools to open this cage and help to carry him. He's very weak." Ethan looked unconvinced. He waited so long already. Emma felt tears prick her eyes, moved by her son's simple compassion and the dog's quiet dignity in the face of abandonment. "I promise we'll come right back. We'll bring Grandpa with his tools and we'll take him somewhere safe and warm." As if understanding their conversation, the dog's eyes moved between them, settling finally on Ethan. With obvious effort, it extended its muzzle toward the bars, close to the boy's hand, but not quite touching. "See," Ethan said triumphantly. "He trusts me." "I can see that," Emma whispered, overwhelmed by what she was witnessing. Something extraordinary was happening between her son and this forgotten animal, a connection that defied explanation. In that moment, with rain misting around them and mud coating their clothes, Emma felt a shift in her understanding of the world. Whatever force had drawn Ethan to this exact spot, whatever bond was forming before her eyes, it was something rare and precious. And somehow she knew it would change all their lives forever. The journey back to the house seemed impossibly long with Ethan fighting every step. He didn't want to leave the dog and made his protest known through tears and repeated attempts to break free from Emma's grasp. "We have to go back to him, Mommy," Ethan wailed, his face flushed with emotion. "He's scared we won't come back." "We will come back, I promise," Emma repeated, trying to keep her voice calm despite her own racing thoughts. "But we need Grandpa's help to open the cage." By the time they reached the house, Ethan was hiccuping with sobs, and Emma's mind was racing with questions. How had the dog ended up abandoned in that cage? Who had left it there? And most perplexing, how had Ethan sensed its presence from so far away? As if answering her unspoken questions, the familiar sound of her father's truck rumbled up the driveway. Emma rushed outside, still holding a squirming Ethan. "Dad! Mom!" "Thank goodness you're back," she called, hurrying toward them. "We need help right away." Martha was the first to notice their mud-covered appearance. "What on earth happened to you two? Emma, you know better than to take him out in this weather." "There's no time for that now," Emma said urgently. "Dad, we found a dog. It's trapped in a cage on the old Miller property just beyond our property line. It looks like it's been there for a long time." Robert's expression shifted from concern to alertness. "A dog in a cage? That doesn't make any sense. Old Miller didn't keep dogs penned up." "Well, there's one there now," Emma insisted. "It's a German Shepherd, and it's in terrible condition. We need to get it out right away." "Hold on now," Martha interrupted. "Let's think this through. If it's been neglected, it might be dangerous. Wild, even." "It's not wild," Ethan declared with absolute certainty, his tears momentarily forgotten. "He's my friend. He was waiting for me." Martha and Robert exchanged glances, the kind of silent communication that comes from decades of marriage. "I'll get my tools," Robert said finally. "Martha, call Jack Reynolds. If the dog's in bad shape, we'll need a vet." "Jack?" Emma asked, surprised by the mention of a name she hadn't heard in years. "Jack Reynolds still practices here?" "Has his own clinic on Main Street," Martha confirmed, already dialing. "Best vet in the county." Memories flooded Emma's mind. Jack had been 3 years ahead of her in school, the quiet, studious boy who'd helped her with science homework, and then disappeared to veterinary school, just as she'd begun to notice him as more than a friend. She pushed the thoughts aside. There were more important matters at hand. Within minutes, Robert had assembled a small arsenal of tools, and they were retracing the path through the wet undergrowth. Ethan insisted on leading the way, his earlier distress transformed into determined purpose. Emma carried him over the worst muddy patches, but as soon as they approached the hidden cage, she set him down. He immediately ran to the front of the cage, dropping to his knees before it. "See," he announced to his grandparents, "I told you he was waiting." Martha gasped when she saw the condition of the German Shepherd. The dog had managed to lift its head at their approach, its amber eyes alert despite its weakened state. "Oh, my lord," she whispered, one hand covering her mouth. That's not possible." "What?" Emma asked, noticing her mother's sudden pallor. "Mom, what is it?" Martha moved forward slowly, as if approaching something both precious and impossible. She knelt beside Ethan, mud soaking through her pants without a second thought. "Max," she whispered, "is that really you?" The dog's ears twitched, and its tail moved in the slightest acknowledgement. "You know this dog?" Emma asked, bewildered. Robert had moved beside his wife, his usually stoic expression softened by shock. "That can't be the same Max. It's been, 6 years? Look at the white mark on his chest." Martha pointed with a trembling finger. "It's shaped like a perfect diamond, and the notch in his right ear. It's him, Robert. I'd know him anywhere." Emma looked between her parents and the dog, confusion mounting. "Will someone please tell me what's going on? How do you know this dog?" Martha reached out, letting the German Shepherd sniff her hand through the bars. "Max belonged to Old Man Miller. He was always a special dog, even as a pup. Smarter than most, almost human in how he understood things. But 6 years ago, he did something none of us will ever forget." She turned to Emma, eyes glistening. "He saved your life, Emma." "What?" Emma stepped back, stunned. "That's not possible. I would remember something like that." "You were home from college for the summer," Robert explained, working on the padlock with a pair of bolt cutters. "You were jogging along Miller Road, wearing those headphones you always had on. Didn't hear the logging truck coming around the blind curve." Max was with Old Miller, who was checking his mailbox," Martha continued. "He saw the truck, saw you were oblivious. According to Old Miller, Max broke free from his leash and ran straight for you, knocked you clear off the road just as the truck rounded the curve." Emma's hand went unconsciously to her left shoulder, where a long, healed scar remained. "I fell into the ditch, cut myself on an old metal fence post. I always thought I'd tripped." "You didn't trip. You were pushed by Max." Robert finally snapped through the padlock. "The impact sent you into the ditch, but it sent Max rolling onto the shoulder. The truck driver managed to swerve, but—" "We all thought Max had been killed," Martha finished quietly. "The truck clipped him. Old Miller was devastated, but when they went to retrieve what they thought would be his body, Max was gone. They searched for days, but never found him. After that, you left for Seattle earlier than planned," Robert added, carefully opening the cage door. "Started your internship, met David. Life moved on." Emma felt dizzy with the implications. "So this dog saved my life and then disappeared for 6 years, only to be found in a cage on the same property?" "I can't explain it," Martha admitted, "but I'd recognize Max anywhere. The real question is, how did he end up back here and in this state?" Ethan had remained unusually quiet during this exchange, one hand stretched through the bars, gently stroking the dog's matted fur. "He came back," the boy said simply. "He was waiting." "Waiting for what, sweetheart?" Emma asked, kneeling beside her son. Ethan looked up at her with absolute certainty. "For us. For you and me." Before Emma could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps broke the moment. A tall figure emerged from the underbrush, medical bag in hand. "Martha called me about an emergency," Jack Reynolds said, his voice deeper than Emma remembered. Then his eyes fell on her, widening in recognition. "Emma Wilson, is that you?" Emma stood quickly, suddenly conscious of her mud-covered clothes and disheveled appearance. "Jack, it's been a while." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or some deeper emotion, before his professional demeanor took over. Martha said something about an abandoned dog. Oh, it's more complicated than that, Robert explained, gesturing toward the cage where Max still lay, watching them all with those intelligent eyes. Jack, we think this is Max, old Miller's dog, the one that saved Emma years ago. Jack's expression shifted to disbelief as he approached the cage. That's not possible. Max disappeared after the accident. Everyone assumed he'd crawled away somewhere to... He paused, glancing at Ethan. To rest. We thought so too, Martha said. But look at the markings, Jack. It's him. Jack knelt before the cage, medical training taking precedence over astonishment. He studied the dog with careful eyes, noting the emaciation, the matted fur, the labored breathing. Regardless of who he is, this animal needs immediate medical attention. He's severely dehydrated, malnourished, and likely has respiratory issues from exposure. Can he be moved? Robert asked. Jack nodded, opening his medical bag. I need to stabilize him first, give him some fluids, check his vitals, then we'll transport him to the clinic. He glanced at Ethan, who remained pressed against the cage. You might want to take the little one back to the house. This isn't a sight for children. No, Ethan's voice was sharp with determination. I stay with him. He needs me. Emma started to object, but something about her son's certainty gave her pause. Jack, this might sound strange, but Ethan is the one who found Max. He somehow knew the dog was here, even though none of us did. They have some kind of connection. Jack looked skeptical but nodded. All right, but he needs to stay back while I work. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Jack administered fluids, checked vital signs, and cleaned the worst of the matted areas around Max's face and paws. Throughout it all, the dog's eyes rarely left Ethan, who sat just beyond Jack's working space, talking softly to the animal in a continuous stream of toddler reassurance. You're going to be okay now. We found you. No more cage, no more rain. You'll have a warm bed and lots of food and toys and walks. Eventually, Jack sat back on his heels. He's stable enough to move. I've got a transport crate in my truck, but it's going to take all of us to carry him there. He's too weak to walk, even if he could stand. Robert and Jack carefully lifted Max onto a makeshift stretcher fashioned from Robert's rain jacket. The dog whimpered once, the first sound he'd made since their arrival, and Ethan immediately moved to his side. It's okay, he whispered, placing his small hand on the dog's head. We're taking you to get better. To everyone's amazement, Max visibly relaxed at the child's touch, his breathing becoming more even. Jack stared at the interaction with professional curiosity. That's unusual, he murmured to Emma as they began the slow journey back through the underbrush. Animals in this condition are typically distrustful, even aggressive from fear. But he seems completely at ease with your son. Ethan has always had a way with animals, Emma replied, watching her son, who insisted on walking alongside the stretcher, one hand maintaining contact with Max at all times. But this is different. It's like they know each other somehow. The trek back to the house and the subsequent journey to Jack's veterinary clinic passed in tense silence. Once there, Max was transferred to an examination table where Jack conducted a more thorough assessment, his expression growing increasingly grave. I won't sugarcoat this, he finally said, turning to the anxious family. His condition is critical. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, possible pneumonia from exposure. The fact that he's survived this long is nothing short of miraculous. But he will survive, right? Emma asked, holding Ethan's hand tightly. Jack hesitated. I'll do everything I can, but you should prepare yourselves. His age, combined with the extent of neglect, the odds aren't in his favor. He'll be okay, Ethan announced with absolute conviction. He came back to find us. He won't leave now. The adults exchanged glances, none willing to contradict the child's faith. Jack cleared his throat. I need to keep him here for intensive treatment. You should all go home, get some rest. I'll call with updates. I want to stay, Ethan declared. Emma knelt beside her son. Sweetheart, Dr. Reynolds needs space to help Max get better. We need to let him work. But Max needs me, Ethan insisted, his lower lip trembling. He gets scared when I'm not there. Jack studied the boy thoughtfully, then made an unusual decision. Tell you what, Ethan, how about you stay for just a little while? You can sit in that chair over there while I work. Sometimes having a friend nearby can help animals feel safer. Emma started to object, but Martha placed a gentle hand on her arm. Let him stay, just for a bit. Jack knows what he's doing. Lol. As the adults stepped aside to discuss treatment options, Ethan settled into the chair beside Max's table. The German Shepherd's eyes remained fixed on the boy, tracking his every movement. And when Ethan began to softly sing a lullaby Emma often used at bedtime, something extraordinary happened. The dog's vital signs, displayed on the monitoring equipment Jack had attached, began to stabilize. Jack noticed it first, his conversation with Emma and her parents faltering as he watched the readings. That's remarkable, he murmured, moving closer to check the equipment. His heart rate was erratic before, but now it's steadying. Respiration is improving too. What does that mean? Martha asked. Jack shook his head, clearly puzzled. I can't explain it scientifically, but it seems your grandson's presence has a therapeutic effect on this dog. He turned to Emma. I've read about animal-human connections like this, but I've never witnessed it firsthand. It's as if they're somehow synchronized. Emma watched her son and the dog, something stirring in her memory. A sensation of falling, a blur of motion, then darkness. Had she really blocked out such a significant event? Or had the trauma of the near miss with the truck somehow erased Max from her recollection? If Ethan's presence helps, she said slowly, then maybe he should stay longer. We could take shifts. Jack considered this, his professional caution warring with what he was witnessing. It's unorthodox, but yes, if you're willing, I think it might actually help Max's recovery. As the adults made arrangements, Ethan continued his quiet vigil beside the examination table, one small hand resting lightly on Max's paw. To anyone watching, it would appear that the boy was comforting the dog, but those paying closer attention might notice the subtle exchange of strength flowing between them, not just from child to animal, but from animal to child as well. In that sterile veterinary room, surrounded by beeping monitors and medical equipment, something profound was taking place. A circle completing itself, a debt being repaid, a bond being forged that would reshape not just their lives, but the entire community of Mapleton. The next 3 days established a rhythm none of them had anticipated. Emma and Ethan practically lived at the veterinary clinic, taking breaks only when Martha insisted on bringing them home for proper meals and brief rests. Jack arranged a small cot in his office where Ethan could nap without leaving the building, and Emma found herself sleeping in the adjacent chair more often than not. Jack's small-town practice transformed to accommodate them. His receptionist, Brenda Calloway, brought in home-cooked meals and fresh clothes. Other staff members worked around the unusual arrangement, some staying late to monitor Max when Jack needed sleep. Word spread through Mapleton. The miraculous return of old Miller's heroic dog and the strange bond between the animal and little Ethan Wilson. On the morning of the 4th day, Emma awoke to find Jack studying Max's charts with a puzzled expression. "What is it?" she asked, her voice husky with sleep. Jack glanced up, momentarily startled. He looked exhausted, dark circles beneath his eyes, evidence of the long hours he'd been putting in. His blood work from yesterday. I've never seen anything like this recovery rate. Clinically speaking, it shouldn't be possible. Emma looked over at the treatment area, where Max lay on a padded bed, Ethan curled beside him. Both were sleeping peacefully, the boy's small hand resting on the dog's now cleaner fur. Jack had managed to shave the worst of the matting away, revealing a coat that was thinner than it should be, but still showed signs of its former glory. "But it is happening," Emma said softly. Jack nodded, rubbing his tired eyes. Yes, it is. And I can't explain it medically. His nutrient absorption, cell regeneration, oxygen levels, they're all improving at rates I've never seen in an animal this compromised. He hesitated. Emma, I have to ask, has Ethan always had this effect on animals? Emma considered the question. He's always loved animals, and they seem drawn to him, but nothing like this. She watched her sleeping son. It's like they recognize something in each other. The timing is peculiar, Jack mused. Max disappears after saving your life, then reappears just as your son finds him, forming this extraordinary connection. He shook his head. I'm a scientist by training. I deal in observable facts, not mystical connections. But this, he gestured toward the sleeping pair, this challenges everything I understand about animal behavior and medical recovery. Life's full of mysteries we can't explain, Emma replied, surprised by her own philosophical tone. The past few days had shifted something in her, a return to the open-minded curiosity that had characterized her before adult responsibilities and disappointments had narrowed her perspective. Jack smiled slightly. You sound like the Emma I remember from high school, the one who argued with our biology teacher about whether animals have souls. You remember that? Emma asked, surprised. I remember a lot about you, Jack admitted, then quickly looked back at his charts, a faint flush coloring his neck. Anyway, the good news is Max's condition has stabilized enough that he could potentially be moved to a home environment. He needs continued care, of course, but the critical phase seems to have passed. That's wonderful news, Emma said, relief washing through her. I'll tell my parents. They've been preparing a space for him in the sunroom. Actually, Jack hesitated. I was thinking maybe he should come to my place. I have the equipment to monitor him, and it would save you all the trips back and forth. Emma studied him curiously. That's very generous, but Ethan wouldn't be there, Jack finished for her. I know, I've been thinking about that too. He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. This may sound crazy, but what if you and Ethan stayed at my place too, just until Max is stronger? I have a guest room and the sofa pulls out. It would be more comfortable than sleeping in these chairs, and Max could have round-the-clock supervision. The offer caught Emma off guard. Jack, we couldn't impose like that. It's not an imposition if it's offered freely, he countered. Besides, it's as much for Max's benefit as yours. Whatever this connection is between him and Ethan, it's clearly aiding his recovery. Before Emma could respond, Ethan stirred, sitting up beside Max. The dog immediately lifted his head, alert to the child's movements. Morning, Mummy. Morning, Dr. Jack, Ethan said, rubbing his eyes. Is Max better today? Jack moved to check the German Shepherd's vitals. He certainly is, buddy. In fact, he's doing so well that I was just telling your mom he might be ready to leave the clinic. Ethan's face lit up. Really? He can come home with us? Jack glanced at Emma, one eyebrow raised in question. She found herself nodding before she'd fully processed her decision. Actually, sweetheart, Dr. Reynolds has invited us to stay at his house for a few days. He has special equipment there to help Max get even stronger. Your house? Ethan asked Jack solemnly. Does it have a yard? Max will need a yard when he's better. Jack chuckled. It does indeed. Not as big as your grandparents' farm, but plenty of space for a dog to run around once he's up to it. The arrangements were made quickly after that. Martha and Robert brought clothes and supplies, helping to transport Max in Jack's SUV to his home on the outskirts of town. It was a modest two-story farmhouse with a veterinary room addition that Jack had built himself after purchasing the property 3 years earlier. It's perfect for house calls and after-hours emergencies, he explained as he showed them around. Saves having to transport animals to the clinic for minor issues. The house itself was surprisingly warm and inviting. not the bachelor pad Emma had expected. Bookcases lined the walls, filled with veterinary texts but also novels, history books, and what appeared to be travel guides. Family photos shared space with professional certifications, and handmade pottery decorated various surfaces. "My sister's an artist," Jack explained, noticing Emma's interest in a particularly beautiful ceramic bowl. "She keeps me supplied with her creations." And that evening, after settling Max in the veterinary room with a specialized dog bed and monitoring equipment, they shared a simple dinner that Jack prepared. Ethan, exhausted from the excitement of the move, fell asleep on the sofa before dessert. "I should put him to bed," Emma said, rising to lift her son. "Let me show you the guest room," Jack offered, leading the way upstairs. The room was clearly designed for visitors, with a queen-sized bed and colorful quilt that Jack mentioned was his mother's handiwork. After tucking Ethan in, Emma returned downstairs to find Jack on the back porch, nursing a cup of coffee and staring out at the moonlit yard. "Thank you for this," she said, joining him, "for everything you've done for Max, for letting us invade your home." Jack smiled, the moonlight softening his features. "It's nice having the company, actually. This place can feel too quiet sometimes." "I can imagine," Emma replied. "After living in Seattle, the silence here in Mapleton took some getting used to again." A comfortable pause stretched between them before Jack asked, "How long are you planning to stay? In Mapleton, I mean." Emma sighed, leaning against the porch railing. "Honestly, I don't know. I came back thinking it would be a quick visit, a chance for Ethan to spend time with his grandparents while I sorted out the divorce paperwork. But now, with Max, it complicates things." Jack nodded. "Speaking of which, we should probably discuss his long-term care. Once he's fully recovered, he'll need a permanent home." "With us," Emma said without hesitation. "After what he did for me, after how he and Ethan have connected, he belongs with us." Jack studied her face. "You seem very certain about that." "I am," Emma confirmed. "It feels right somehow, like things are coming full circle." They talked for hours after that, catching up on the years between. Emma learned about Jack's marriage and divorce, his decision to return to Mapleton after working at a prestigious animal hospital in Boston. Jack listened as Emma described her life in Seattle, her growing disillusionment with her marketing career, and the slow unraveling of her marriage to David. "He never really understood Ethan," she admitted. "The way he notices things others don't, how sensitive he is to everything around him. David called it imaginative nonsense and kept pushing for more structure, more discipline. Some people are threatened by what they don't understand," Jack observed. "Ethan's connection with Max, it's unusual but extraordinary. Instead of dismissing it, we should be trying to learn from it." Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. "That's exactly how I feel. But I've spent so long having my perceptions questioned that sometimes I doubt myself." "Don't," Jack said simply. "What you're witnessing between your son and Max is real. I can't explain it scientifically, but that doesn't make it any less valid." And when Emma finally went to bed that night, she felt lighter than she had in years. Something about Jack's acceptance, his willingness to embrace the inexplicable, resonated deeply with her. The next morning brought new developments. Max attempted to stand for the first time since his rescue, wobbling on weak legs, but remaining upright long enough to nuzzle Ethan's hair. The boys' delighted laughter filled the house, a sound so pure that Emma found herself blinking back tears. Jack documented everything in his medical journal, taking photos and detailed notes. "This could be significant for veterinary rehabilitation studies," he explained. "The emotional component of healing is often overlooked in favor of pharmaceutical interventions." By the end of the week, Max was walking short distances, gaining strength visibly with each passing day. His coat began to regain its luster, and his eyes, always intelligent, now shone with renewed vitality. Ethan insisted on being involved in every aspect of the dog's care, solemnly helping to administer medications and preparing the special diet Jack had prescribed. Word of Max's remarkable recovery continued to spread through Mapleton. Visitors began arriving at Jack's home. First Martha and Robert, then neighbors who remembered old Miller's devoted companion, and finally strangers who had heard the story and wanted to witness the miracle for themselves. "It's becoming something of a local legend," Jack commented one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Ethan read a picture book to Max in the yard. The dog lay attentively beside the boy, head on paws, ears perked to catch every word. "People need something hopeful to believe in," Emma observed, "especially in small towns where good news can be scarce." Jack nodded thoughtfully. "There's been talk about using Max's story to raise awareness for animal welfare issues in the county. The shelters here are underfunded, and there's no organized system for dealing with abandoned or neglected animals." "Like what happened to Max," Emma said softly. "Exactly. No one even knew he was there, suffering alone for who knows how long." Jack's voice tightened with emotion. "If it weren't for Ethan..." And they both watched as her son pointed to pictures in the book, explaining them seriously to Max as if the dog were another child. The German shepherd's eyes never left the boy's face, his attention complete and unwavering. "I've been thinking," Emma said hesitantly, "about staying in Mapleton, not just for a visit, but permanently." Jack turned to her, surprise evident in his expression. "What about your job in Seattle? Your life there?" Emma shrugged. "My position was already tenuous before I left. Budget cuts, restructuring, the usual corporate excuses. As for my life," she sighed, "Seattle never really felt like home, not the way Mapleton does. I think I was just too stubborn to admit I'd made a mistake in leaving. And Ethan, what about school friends? He's only 2. This would be the perfect time to make a transition before he's formed those deeper attachments." She watched her son, who was now lying in the grass beside Max, both of them looking up at the evening sky. "Besides, I think he's already found his best friend." Jack followed her gaze, his expression softening. "They are something special together, aren't they?" "They are," Emma agreed, "and I don't want to separate them, not when Max has already lost so much time." She turned to face Jack fully. "What do you think? Am I crazy for considering this?" "I think," Jack said carefully, "that recognizing where you belong is never crazy. Coming back to Mapleton was the best decision I ever made, even though everyone told me I was throwing away my career." "And were you? Throwing it away?" Jack smiled, looking out at his property, the house he'd renovated, the clinic he'd built, the community he served. "Not at all. I was finding it. Different from what I'd imagined, but better in ways I couldn't have predicted." Emma felt something shift inside her, a quiet certainty settling into place. "I need to call my boss tomorrow, and a realtor in Seattle." Jack's hand found hers on the porch railing, a brief touch that nonetheless sent warmth coursing through her. "For what it's worth, I think Mapleton would be lucky to have you back, all 3 of you," he added, nodding toward Ethan and Max. As if sensing they were being discussed, Ethan looked up and waved, then whispered something in Max's ear. The dog raised his head, meeting Emma's gaze with that unnervingly intelligent stare that seemed to see straight through to her thoughts. "I think they approve," Emma said softly. In that moment, watching her son and the dog who had saved her life form a bond that defied explanation, Emma felt the scattered pieces of her life realigning. The uncertainty that had clouded her future since the breakdown of her marriage was clearing, revealing a path she hadn't expected, but now couldn't imagine not taking. Mapleton was calling her home, and this time, she was listening. 2 weeks after Max's rescue, Mapleton held its annual Harvest Festival. In previous years, the event had been a modest affair. A few food stalls in the town square, games for children, and perhaps a small stage for local musicians. This year, however, the festival had taken on new significance. Posters around town featured a stylized silhouette of a German shepherd and the words, "Max's second chance, help give other animals their first." Emma stood at the edge of the town square, watching volunteers set up booths and attractions. She still couldn't quite believe how quickly things had changed. Her resignation from the Seattle firm had been accepted with surprising ease. Her apartment was on the market, and her parents had welcomed her decision to move back with enthusiasm that bordered on relief. "Penny for your thoughts?" Jack's voice broke through her reverie as he approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee from Molly's diner. "Just marveling at how much can change in such a short time," Emma replied, accepting the offered cup gratefully. "2 weeks ago, I was planning to head back to Seattle after a quick visit. Now I'm helping organize an animal welfare fundraiser and house hunting in my hometown." Jack smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. Speaking of surprises, Emma nodded toward the central display being erected by Robert and several other men from town. "I can't believe Dad suggested renaming the festival plaza after Max. He's not usually one for sentimentality." "Max's story touched something in people," Jack observed. "It's not just about a dog surviving against the odds. It's about connection, redemption, second chances, things we all need to believe in." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the activity around them. In the 2 weeks since Max's rescue, the transformation in the community had been remarkable. What began as a simple story of a boy finding an abandoned dog had evolved into something larger, a catalyst for change that rippled through Mapleton in unexpected ways. The most visible change was the newly formed Mapleton Animal Welfare Committee, hastily assembled but surprisingly effective. Under Jack's guidance, they had already established an emergency response team for abandoned or injured animals, arranged foster homes for pets whose owners were temporarily unable to care for them, and started fundraising for a proper shelter facility. Less tangible but equally significant was the shift in community engagement. People who had barely acknowledged each other for years were now working side by side, united by a common purpose that transcended the usual small-town divisions. "Mum said old Miller's nephew is coming to the festival," Emma mentioned, watching Ethan and Max at the far end of the square. The boy and dog moved as a unit, Ethan's hand resting lightly on Max's back as they inspected a game booth being set up. Max's recovery had been nothing short of miraculous. While still thinner than ideal, his coat had regained much of its luster, and his strength improved daily. He moved with increasing confidence, though he remained constantly aware of Ethan's location, never straying more than a few feet from the boy. "Carl Miller," Jack nodded. "He inherited the property but never moved in. Lives in Burlington, I think. I called him when we found Max, but he seemed evasive. Said he had no idea there was a dog on the property." "Do you believe him?" Emma asked, a protective edge creeping into her voice. Jack hesitated. "I'm not sure. It's possible Max returned to the property after Carl had already stopped regular visits. The cage was likely left over from old Miller's days. He used to rescue hunting dogs, keep them temporarily until he could place them." "Still," Emma frowned, "someone put Max in that cage and left him there. He didn't lock himself in." "True," Jack conceded. "But dwelling on that won't change what happened. What matters is that Max is safe now, and his story is helping other animals." Emma was about to respond when her phone chimed with a text message. She glanced at the screen and groaned. "David," Jack guessed, having become familiar with that particular expression over the past 2 weeks. Emma nodded. "He's concerned about the stability of Ethan's environment and thinks I'm making impulsive decisions based on emotional reactions rather than considering our son's best interests." Jack's expression remained neutral, though Emma noticed the slight tension in his jaw. "And what did you tell him?" That Ethan has never been happier or more engaged, that he's forming connections with his grandparents and the community, and that having Max in his life has been transformative. She sighed, pocketing the phone. And that if he's so concerned, he's welcome to come see for himself, instead of making judgments from 2,000 miles away. Jack raised an eyebrow. You invited him to Mapleton? Called his bluff, Emma clarified. David hated visiting even when we were married. Too slow, too provincial, not enough upscale restaurants to impress his clients. She shrugged. He won't come. And if he does? Emma considered this. Then he'll see that I'm not making an emotional, impulsive decision. I'm making a deliberate choice about the kind of life I want for Ethan and myself. She watched her son, who was now demonstrating to an elderly volunteer how Max could sit, stay, and offer his paw on command. A life with roots, community, and genuine connections, not the superficial networking that consumed our existence in Seattle. But Jack's hand found hers briefly, a touch of solidarity that had become increasingly common between them. For what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice, not just for Ethan, but for yourself too. The moment was interrupted by Martha calling from across the square, waving them over to resolve some question about the booth arrangements. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of activity, hanging banners, arranging display tables, coordinating with food vendors, and finalizing the schedule of events. By noon, the festival was in full swing. Families streamed into the square, drawn by the promise of traditional harvest activities and the now famous story of Max. The German Shepherd had become something of a local celebrity, with visitors lining up to meet him and Ethan in a special greeting area designed to prevent the dog from becoming overwhelmed. He's a natural therapy dog, observed Gloria Patterson, the town's elementary school principal, as she watched Max gently interact with a shy child who had approached him. The way he attunes to people's emotions is remarkable. Jack thinks it might be part of why he and Ethan connected so strongly, Emma explained. They both have this heightened sensitivity to others. Gloria nodded thoughtfully. You know, when school starts, we'd love to have Max visit. We've been looking into animal-assisted learning programs for some of our students with special needs. Emma felt a surge of pride, both for Max and for the community that was embracing him so wholeheartedly. I think he'd like that. Once he's fully recovered, of course. Of course, Gloria agreed. No rush, just something to consider for the future. The future. Emma was still getting accustomed to imagining her future in Mapleton after years of urban life. Yet somehow, it felt increasingly right, as if she'd been trying to fit herself into the wrong-shaped space all along. As the day progressed, Emma found herself constantly aware of Jack's presence, his laugh carrying across the square, the way his eyes sought hers when something amusing happened, the natural authority he projected when answering questions about animal welfare. She wasn't ready to name the warmth that spread through her whenever they interacted, but she couldn't deny its existence either. Late in the afternoon, a sleek black SUV with rental plates pulled into the parking area adjacent to the square. Emma, who was helping at the donation booth, didn't notice it immediately. It was Ethan's excited voice that caught her attention. "Daddy! You came to see Max!" Emma turned sharply, her heart constricting at the sight of David Wilson striding across the square. Immaculately dressed in designer casual wear that looked absurdly out of place amid the festival's homespun charm, he moved with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "Hello, buddy," David said, kneeling to embrace Ethan. His eyes flickered to Max, who stood protectively close to the boy. "And this must be the famous dog I've been hearing about." Emma moved quickly to join them, anxiety churning in her stomach. "David, this is a surprise." He straightened, offering her a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. Clearly, You didn't think I'd actually come see what my son is being dragged into? Not here, Emma said quietly, conscious of nearby festival-goers. We can talk privately. David glanced around the crowded square, his distaste evident. Fine. But I'm serious about this, Emma. A sudden move to the middle of nowhere based on finding some stray dog? This isn't stable parenting. Before Emma could respond, Jack approached, his expression carefully neutral. Everything okay here? David's eyes narrowed as he assessed Jack. And you are? Jack Reynolds, town veterinarian. He extended a hand which David reluctantly shook. You must be Ethan's father. David Wilson. The response was clipped. I understand you've been involved in this situation with the dog. Dun Max, Ethan corrected firmly, his small hand buried in the German shepherd's fur. His name is Max, and he saved Mommy before I was born. David frowned. What is he talking about, Emma? It's a long story, Emma sighed. One better told somewhere quieter. She glanced at Jack. Would you mind watching Ethan and Max for a bit? Of course, Jack replied, then crouched to Ethan's level. Hey, buddy, how about you help me judge the pumpkin pie contest? I hear Mrs. Calloway made her famous secret recipe. Ethan looked uncertainly between his parents. Can Max come too? Absolutely, Jack assured him. The judge's table has a special spot just for him. Once Ethan and Max had moved away with Jack, Emma led David to a quiet corner of the park adjacent to the square. She explained the full story, Max's history with her family, his miraculous reappearance, and the extraordinary bond he'd formed with Ethan. David listened with increasing skepticism. So you're uprooting our son's life because of some cosmic coincidence involving a dog? Emma, listen to yourself. This sounds like the plot of a Hallmark movie, not a rational life decision. It's not just about Max, Emma countered. It's about realizing what's truly important. Ethan thrives here. He has space to explore, grandparents who adore him, a community that values him. In Seattle, he was just another kid in an overpriced preschool, scheduled and structured within an inch of his life. Structure and education are important, David insisted. What kind of opportunities will he have in this backwater? Emma's patience thinned. The opportunity to be a child, to form meaningful relationships, to develop his extraordinary empathy instead of having it dismissed as inconvenient. I never dismissed. You did, Emma interrupted. Every time you called his sensitivity acting out, or his perceptiveness overactive imagination, every time you pushed for more activities, more achievements, more things that looked good on a parental resume but did nothing for his happiness. David fell silent, his jaw tightening. Finally, he said, I want what's best for him. So do I, Emma replied, her voice softening. That's why I'm staying. Because here he can be himself, all his wonderful, sensitive, perceptive self, without being made to feel that those qualities are somehow deficient. They stood in silence, the distant sounds of the festival washing over them. Emma could see Ethan at the judges' table, solemnly tasting pie, with Max sitting attentively beside him. Jack stood nearby, occasionally leaning down to say something that made Ethan laugh. You've changed, David observed, following her gaze. 2 weeks in this town and you're different. I've remembered who I am, Emma corrected. The person I was before I tried to fit myself into the life you wanted. David's expression shifted, something like realization dawning in his eyes. There's more to this decision than just Ethan and a dog, isn't there? He glanced meaningfully toward Jack. How long has that been going on? Indeed, it's not going on, Emma responded, feeling her cheeks warm despite her efforts to remain composed. Jack is a friend who's helped us through an extraordinary situation. A friend, David repeated skeptically. Right. Emma took a deep breath. My personal life is no longer your concern, David. The only thing that matters is Ethan's well-being, and I genuinely believe he will thrive here." David studied her for a long moment, then looked back at their son. Ethan was now showing Max a piece of pie crust, explaining something with animated gestures. The German Shepherd watched him with complete attention, as if every word the child spoke was of vital importance. "He does seem happy," David admitted reluctantly. "More animated than I've seen him in a while." "He is happy," Emma confirmed, "and I want him to stay that way." David sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "I'm not agreeing to anything permanent yet, but I won't fight you on staying through the end of the year. We can reassess after the holidays." It was more of a concession than Emma had expected. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," David warned. "I'll be checking in regularly, and I expect video calls 3 times a week, not the once weekly we'd discussed." "Of course," Emma agreed. "Ethan needs you in his life, David. That's never been in question." Tattoo. As they walked back toward the festival, David asked, "So what happens with the dog? Once he's fully recovered?" "He stays with us," Emma said simply. "He and Ethan, they need each other." David looked like he wanted to argue, but instead shook his head. "Just promise me you're thinking clearly about all this, Emma, not just reacting to the emotion of the moment." Emma paused, considering her response carefully. "I've never been thinking more clearly in my life." Oh, when they rejoined the festival, they found Ethan proudly wearing a blue ribbon that declared him an honorary pie judge. Max sat beside him, a matching ribbon tied carefully to his collar. "Daddy, I picked the best pie," Ethan announced, rushing to David. "And Max helped. He can smell the good ones." David managed a genuine smile, kneeling to his son's level. "That's quite a responsibility, being a judge." "Jack said I did a excellent job," Ethan beamed. "And now we're going to take pictures for the new animal shelter. Max is the special guest." Jack approached cautiously, respecting the family moment. "The photographer is ready whenever you are, Ethan. No rush." David stood, extending his hand to Jack with more sincerity than before. "Thank you for taking care of the dog, and for—" He glanced at Ethan. "For everything else." Jack accepted the handshake. "Max is a special case, as is your son." Dai. As the small group moved toward the photography area, Emma felt a strange sense of worlds colliding. Her Seattle life and her Mapleton roots, her past and her potential future, all converging in this one autumn afternoon. The festival continued around them, the community buzzing with collective purpose. Donation jars filled with bills and coins, volunteers signed up for the new animal rescue network, and in the center of it all, a German shepherd and a little boy remained inseparable. 2 souls connected by something beyond explanation, their bond rippling outward to touch everyone around them. Later that evening, after David had left for his hotel with plans to spend the following day with Ethan, Emma found herself back at the festival grounds. Most visitors had departed, but volunteers remained, cleaning and dismantling booths by lantern light. The damp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke, a combination Emma had almost forgotten in her years away. Jack found her sitting on a bench at the edge of the square, watching the cleanup efforts. "Successful day," he commented, settling beside her. "We raised almost $15,000. Enough to start renovating the old Patterson warehouse into a proper shelter." "That's amazing," Emma replied, genuine warmth in her voice. "The whole town really came together." "How did things go with David?" Jack asked carefully. Emma sighed. "Better than expected, worse than hoped. He's agreed to a trial period. Let us stay through the holidays before making any permanent decisions." "That's something, at least." "It is," Emma agreed. "And seeing Ethan so happy, I think it affected him, made him realize that our Seattle life wasn't necessarily the ideal he thought it was." They sat in companionable silence, watching the last of the decorations being taken down. From across the square, Emma could see Max and Ethan helping Martha collect fallen streamers, the boy and dog moving in perfect synchronization. "You know what's strange?" Emma said softly. "2 weeks ago, my life felt completely derailed. Everything I thought I was working toward, the career, the marriage, the city life, it all fell apart. I should feel lost, but instead, Jack prompted when she fell silent. Instead, I feel like I've finally found my way. Like all those things that seemed so important were actually leading me away from where I was meant to be." Jack's hand found hers in the gathering darkness, his fingers warm against her skin. "Sometimes the long way around is the only way to get where you're supposed to go." Emma turned to face him, seeing in his eyes the same quiet certainty she felt growing within herself. "Do you believe in second chances, Jack? Real ones, not just consolation prizes after things fall apart?" "I do," he answered without hesitation. "In fact, I think that's what this whole story has been about. Second chances. For Max, for you, for this town." He paused, his voice softening. "Maybe for me too." Across the square, Ethan's laughter rang out as Max playfully tugged at a fallen banner, growling softly in a game they had invented. The sound carried in the evening air, pure and joyful. The sound of a child completely at home in his world, surrounded by those who understood and cherished him exactly as he was. "Second chances," Emma repeated, her fingers tightening around Jack's. "I like the sound of that." Above them, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed the hour. Mapleton settled into evening, changed in subtle but significant ways by the events of the past 2 weeks. And at the center of that change, a boy and a dog continued their dance of mutual devotion, oblivious to the ripples they had created. Ripples that would continue to spread in ways none of them could yet imagine. 6 months later, spring arrived in Mapleton with a flourish of green that transformed the landscape. The Wilson farmhouse, once simply Emma's childhood home, now bore the subtle marks of her permanent return. New curtains in the converted carriage house that served as her apartment, bright toys scattered across the lawn, and the sturdy fence that enclosed a generous portion of the yard for Max's territory. Emma sat on the porch swing, savoring her morning coffee, while watching Ethan and Max explore the garden beds where Martha was planting the season's first vegetables. The German Shepherd, now fully restored to health, moved with the fluid grace that had once made him the pride of old Miller's farm. His coat gleamed in the morning sunlight, and his amber eyes remained ever watchful over his young companion. "Mummy, look!" Ethan called, pointing to a row of tiny green shoots. "Grandma says these are going to be carrots." "That's wonderful, sweetie," Emma called back, smiling at her mother, who was patiently explaining the growing process to her grandson. The past 6 months had unfolded in ways Emma could never have predicted. After the Harvest Festival, David had returned to Seattle, his initial skepticism about her decision softening as he witnessed Ethan's happiness. The trial period had stretched through the holidays and into the new year, with increasingly less resistance on David's part. By February, he had signed the revised custody agreement, officially acknowledging Mapleton as Ethan's primary residence. Emma's professional transition had been equally successful. Her remote marketing consultation business had steadily gained clients, many attracted by her unique combination of big city experience and small-town sensibilities. The carriage house, renovated over the winter, now contained both her living quarters and a comfortable home office that overlooked the sprawling backyard. And then there was Jack. Their relationship had developed with a measured pace that felt simultaneously cautious and inevitable. Weekend hikes, quiet dinners after Ethan was asleep, long conversations by the fireplace, each moment building upon the foundation of friendship that had formed during those intense days after Max's rescue. Jack had become a constant in their lives, his presence so natural that Ethan now included him in family drawings without prompting. The sound of tires on gravel drew Emma from her reverie. She looked up to see Jack's truck pulling into the driveway, right on schedule for their planned outing. "Jack's here," Ethan announced, abandoning the garden to race toward the vehicle, Max loping effortlessly alongside him. Jack emerged from the truck, catching Ethan as the boy launched himself forward in greeting. "Hey there, adventure man. Ready for our big day?" "Yes, I've been ready since forever," Ethan declared, wriggling with excitement. Max is ready too. He's wearing his special vest. Indeed, the German Shepherd was sporting the distinctive therapy dog vest that had become a familiar sight around Mapleton. The Mapleton Animal Wellness Center, known locally as Max's Place, was celebrating its grand opening today, the culmination of 6 months of community effort. What had begun as a modest fundraising campaign at the Harvest Festival had snowballed into something far more substantial. The old Patterson warehouse had been transformed into a full-service animal welfare facility, complete with a shelter, veterinary clinic, rehabilitation center, and community education space. Jack had been instrumental in the design, bringing in specialists from his days in Boston to ensure the facility met the highest standards. "Morning," Jack greeted Emma, leaning in for a quick kiss as she descended the porch steps. "Ready for the big reveal?" As ready as we'll ever be," Emma replied, returning his kiss before calling to her mother. "Mom, we're heading out. See you at the ceremony." Martha waved from the garden. "Wouldn't miss it for the world. Your father's just changing out of his work clothes. We'll be right behind you." The drive to town was filled with Ethan's excited chatter from the back seat, where he sat beside Max, explaining to the dog exactly what would happen at the opening ceremony. "And you get to wear a special ribbon, and everyone will take pictures, and then we'll show people how you help kids feel better when they're scared." Emma and Jack exchanged amused glances. At 3 years old, Ethan had developed an impressive vocabulary, particularly when it came to explaining things to Max. The bond between them had only strengthened over the months, evolving in ways that continued to fascinate everyone who witnessed it. Max's role as the town's first certified therapy dog had been Jack's idea, inspired by the remarkable effect the German Shepherd had on Ethan and others who interacted with him. After proper training and certification, Max now made regular visits to the elementary school, the senior center, and the regional hospital's children's ward. His gentle demeanor and extraordinary empathy made him a natural, and his sessions were consistently overbooked. "Nervous?" Jack asked Emma quietly, while Ethan continued his monologue to Max. "A little," she admitted. "It's not every day you give the keynote speech at a ribbon-cutting ceremony." Jack squeezed her hand. "You'll be amazing. No one tells Max's story better than you." As they approached the town center, Emma was struck once again by how much Mapleton had changed. New businesses had opened along Main Street. The park had been renovated with updated play equipment, and there was an energy to the place that had been missing during her years away. Some of this was due to general economic improvement, but much of it stemmed directly from the animal welfare initiative that had captured the town's imagination and resources. The crowd gathered outside the new center exceeded Emma's expectations. It seemed the entire town had turned out, along with visitors from neighboring communities and even a few news crews from the regional stations. A large banner stretched across the entrance declared, "Max's Place, where second chances begin." Mayor Helen Griffith spotted them immediately, hurrying over with the efficient enthusiasm that had made her an unexpected ally in their efforts. "There's our man of the hour," she exclaimed, bending to greet Max, who responded with dignified acceptance of her attention. "And our speakers, of course. We're almost ready to begin. The governor's representative just arrived." The next hour passed in a blur of activity, greeting dignitaries, positioning Ethan and Max for the ceremonial ribbon cutting, making last-minute adjustments to Emma's speech. Through it all, Emma felt a surreal sense of witnessing something that far exceeded her original vision when she'd returned to Mapleton. What had begun as a personal journey, a mother seeking the best environment for her sensitive child, had expanded into a community renaissance. The Animal Welfare Centre was just the most visible manifestation of a broader shift in Mapleton's identity and priorities. When Mayor Griffith finally called her to the podium, Emma took a deep breath, centering herself before facing the assembled crowd. Ethan and Max sat in the front row with Jack beside them. Her parents stood nearby, Robert's usual stoic expression softened with unmistakable pride. 6 months ago, Emma began, her voice steady despite her nerves, I returned to Mapleton for what I thought would be a brief visit. I was at a crossroads in my life, a failed marriage, an uncertain career path, and most importantly, concerns about raising a highly sensitive child in an environment that didn't nurture his unique qualities. She paused, making eye contact with various faces in the crowd, neighbors she'd known since childhood, new friends made over recent months, even David, who had arrived yesterday for his monthly visit with Ethan. What I didn't expect was that my 2-year-old son would lead me to a discovery that would change not just our lives, but an entire community. When Ethan sensed Max's presence on that rainy autumn day, when he insisted on venturing out to find what he called the sad waiting, he set in motion a series of events that none of us could have anticipated. Emma recounted the story of Max's rescue, his remarkable recovery, and the extraordinary bond he formed with Ethan. She spoke of the German Shepherd's history with her family, how he had saved her from a potential tragedy years earlier, only to disappear and then re-emerge when needed most. But Max's story isn't just about one dog and one family, she continued. It's about what happens when a community recognizes that compassion is not a limited resource, that by extending our circle of concern to include the most vulnerable among us, we enrich our own lives immeasurably. She gestured toward the new facility behind her. This center represents far more than brick and mortar. It stands as a testament to what we can accomplish when we work together toward a common purpose. It will provide shelter for abandoned animals, medical care for the injured, rehabilitation for the traumatized, and education for our community. But perhaps most importantly, it will facilitate the kinds of connections that transform lives, human and animal alike. Emma looked directly at Ethan and Max, her voice softening. My son and his extraordinary companion have taught me something profound about healing. It doesn't always come from expected sources. Sometimes it arrives in forms we never anticipated, a child's intuition, an animal's loyalty, a community's embrace. The remainder of her speech outlined the center's programs and acknowledged the countless individuals who had contributed to making it a reality. When she finally stepped away from the podium to thunderous applause, Emma felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The story had been told properly, the vision articulated clearly. The ribbon cutting that followed featured Ethan and Max in central roles, the boy solemnly holding the oversized scissors with Jack's assistance, while Max sat attentively beside him. When the ribbon fell and the doors officially opened, cheers erupted from the crowd. The reception and tours lasted well into the afternoon. Emma found herself constantly in demand, explaining features of the facility, introducing Max to visitors, accepting congratulations from well-wishers. Through it all, she maintained an awareness of Ethan's whereabouts, ensuring he wasn't overwhelmed by the attention. It was during a brief, quiet moment, when the main crowd had moved to the rehabilitation wing, that Emma found herself alone with Jack in the center's garden. A peaceful space designed for animals and visitors to interact in a natural setting. You were magnificent up there, Jack said, his arm slipping around her waist. I knew you would be. Emma leaned into his embrace, savoring the moment of calm amidst the day's excitement. I still can't quite believe all this happened because of one rainy day and a stubborn toddler. I've been thinking about that, Jack mused. About coincidence versus purpose. What are the odds that Max would find his way back to the Miller property after all those years? That he would survive long enough for Ethan to sense his presence and insist on finding him? That his rescue would spark this entire movement? Astronomical, Emma admitted. If I hadn't lived it, I'm not sure I would believe it. Maybe it wasn't coincidence at all, Jack suggested. Maybe there are connections in this world that operate beyond our understanding, bonds that transcend time and circumstance. Emma considered this, watching through the garden entrance as Ethan led a small group of children in a demonstration of how to approach Max respectfully. The German Shepherd sat with perfect poise, his attention divided between the children and Ethan, responding to subtle cues that only he seemed to perceive. I used to be more skeptical about such things, Emma said finally. But after everything we've witnessed, it's hard to dismiss the possibility of deeper patterns at work. Jack's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. Whatever forces brought all of this together, I'm grateful for them. So am I, Emma agreed, her voice soft but certain, more than I can express. The moment was interrupted by Mayor Griffith calling for the therapy dog demonstration to begin in the community room. Duty called, and they rejoined the festivities, moving through the remainder of the day with the practiced coordination they had developed over months of partnership. By evening, when the last visitors had departed and only the core team remained, exhaustion settled over them all. Ethan had fallen asleep on a window seat in the education room, Max curled protectively around him. Emma stood in the doorway watching them, her heart full with a contentment she had once thought beyond her reach. Martha appeared beside her, following her gaze to the sleeping pair. He's something special, that boy of yours. Always has been. Yes, Emma agreed. I just needed to find a place where that would be nurtured rather than suppressed. And now you have, Martha said simply. Now you both have. Later, as they drove back to the farmhouse under a canopy of stars, Ethan and Max both sleeping in the back seat of Jack's truck, Emma reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From the rain-soaked discovery of an abandoned dog to the creation of a center that would help countless animals for years to come. It was a path she could never have envisioned. What are you thinking about? Jack asked softly, his eyes on the road ahead. About journeys, Emma replied, about how the most important ones rarely follow a straight line. Jack smiled, the moonlight catching the expression. True. They loop and double back, take unexpected detours, but somehow lead exactly where we need to go, Emma finished. When they reached the farmhouse, Jack carried the still sleeping Ethan to his bed, while Emma guided a drowsy Max to his cushion in the corner of the room. As they had done countless times over the past months, they moved in quiet synchronization, completing the evening routine with practiced ease. Outside on the porch, with the house settled into silence behind them, Jack took Emma's hand. I've been wanting to ask you something. Emma recognized the seriousness in his tone, a flutter of anticipation rising in her chest. What is it? Jack took a deep breath. My lease is up next month. I know, Emma nodded, having heard him mention this several times recently. I've been thinking about looking for something more permanent, something with more space, maybe some land. He paused, his eyes meeting hers in the soft porch light. Something for all of us, if you're ready for that. Emma felt her breath catch, the implication of his words washing over her. Jack, are you asking? I'm asking if you and Ethan, and Max of course, would consider making a home with me, a real one together. His voice was steady, despite the vulnerability in his eyes. I know it hasn't been that long, but I also know that what we've found isn't something that comes along twice in a lifetime. Emma thought of all the careful steps they had taken, the deliberate pace they had maintained out of respect for Ethan's well-being and her recent divorce. She thought of the countless evenings spent in comfortable conversation, the seamless way they had merged their lives without formal declaration, the unspoken understanding that had grown between them. "Yes," she said simply, the single word carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Yes, I think we're ready for that." Jack's smile illuminated his face as he drew her into his arms. "I was hoping you'd say that." "Did you really doubt it?" Emma asked, leaning into his embrace. "Not doubt exactly," Jack replied, "but some things are too important to assume." They stood together in the quiet of the spring evening, the scent of lilacs drifting from Martha's garden, the distant chorus of frogs providing gentle accompaniment to the moment. Through the open window, they could hear the soft sounds of Ethan's breathing and Max's occasional contented sigh, boy and dog even synchronized in sleep. "You know," Emma said after a comfortable silence, "when I first came back to Mapleton, I thought I was simply retreating to something familiar while I figured out my next step. I never imagined I was actually moving forward toward the life I was meant to have all along." "Sometimes the way forward looks like going back," Jack observed, "until you realize you're actually on an entirely new path." Emma nodded against his shoulder. "A path that led to Max, to you, to all of this." Oh, inside the house, Max stirred briefly, raising his head to check on Ethan before settling back into sleep, his duty fulfilled for the moment but never abandoned. That unwavering vigilance, that absolute dedication to his chosen person, it had become the symbol not just of their family bond, but of an entire community's renewed purpose. "I used to wonder why Max survived all those years after the accident, only to end up abandoned in that cage," Emma said softly. "Now I think perhaps he was waiting, holding on against impossible odds, because somehow, on some level beyond our understanding, he knew he would be needed again." "Not just needed," Jack corrected gently. "Essential. To Ethan, to you, to this town, to all of us who needed reminding of what truly matters." Indeed, as the moon rose higher over Mapleton, casting silver light across the landscape that had witnessed their unfolding story, Emma embraced the certainty that had grown within her over these transformative months. What had begun with a child's inexplicable awareness and a dog's indomitable spirit had blossomed into something that transcended explanation. A tapestry of connections, second chances, and renewed purpose that would continue to unfold in ways they had only begun to imagine. Inside, Ethan slept peacefully, one hand draped over Max's back even in slumber. Outside, Emma and Jack stood entwined, planning a shared future that neither had anticipated but both now recognized as inevitable. And throughout Mapleton, the ripples of their collective journey continued to spread, touching lives and transforming perspectives in a widening circle of compassion and connection. The story that had begun in mud and rain, in abandonment and uncertainty, had transformed into one of belonging and purpose. And while none of them could predict exactly where the path would lead next, they moved forward together, family and community alike, guided by the simple, profound truth that Max had embodied from the beginning. Some bonds transcend explanation, some connections defy circumstance, and sometimes the most miraculous second chances arrive in forms we never expected, but somehow always needed. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Ethan, Emma, and Max has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it by clicking to your left. If you enjoyed this tale of extraordinary connection and second chances, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life and the remarkable bonds we form with each other. Don't miss our upcoming content as we continue to share narratives that inspire and move you. We look forward to reading your thoughts in the comments section below.